Aloha, welcome back to Don't Just Age, Engage on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Dr. Larry Grimm. Today on the show, we'll be discussing one more exemplary, extraordinary elderhood with our guest, Maureen Hoyt. Welcome, Maureen. And let me start with you. What have been the worst challenges or the worst things about aging that you have encountered in your life?
Oh, gosh, the obvious, I think, more than anything else is perhaps just the deterioration of my physical abilities and not being able to do exactly all the things that I used to do. But I have learned to adapt accordingly. My children still think I'm 35 and expectations of me that are sometimes unfulfilled. So I work on moving beyond the limitations of my physicality and moving into experiencing life from the observer standpoint sometimes rather than the active and physical point. So that would probably be the biggest thing.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's often the way people feel that they enter elderhood is they enter elderhood by being dragged by the physical demise into aging. And there are other aspects to aging that I like to listen for as I work with clients. And that is that there's the spiritual aspect, there's the physical aspect, as you mentioned, there's relational aspect to aging, and there's an economical aspect to aging. And so I am happy to have you on my show today, Maureen, because it seems to me you are a extraordinary elderhood in your extraordinary elderhood that you have fashioned for yourself. And one of the things I like to do in my show is to model success. We study and study and study our problems, but one of the things we benefit most from is when we study and model success and follow the models of people who've really done a good job in aging, for instance, aging well. So would you just share a little bit of introductory with you about yourself, please, Maureen?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I was up till I was 17 years old, I was raised in Canada. And we moved to California in the early 60s because my father was experiencing challenges with the weather where we lived. I lived in southeastern British Columbia in the middle of the Rockies, not far from Banff and Lake Louise. And so moving to California was just culture shock, complete culture shock. And when we first arrived, I had not turned 17 yet, just a couple of months before I turned 17. And so they tested me when I entered school in Santa Rosa, California, and I tested to graduate level. And so they put me in, I was a junior, I was in the 11th grade in Canada. They put me in the 12th grade when I arrived in California. And I didn't know anybody. And I had been on the school newspaper for years. So what I did was I joined the school newspaper and wrote articles. They wanted me to interview all the football teams. So it was a terrific way of getting to know people. And I got to interview all the guys on the football team. And fast forward to graduating early, I went to Spokane to Kinman Business University for a year until my father got sick again and could no longer afford to pay for that. So I moved back to California with my older sister to San Francisco. And that's where I enrolled in Berkeley with an English major and a journalism minor with a focus on editing and proofreading. Okay, fast forward, I learned early that it was good for me to work and go to school. So I worked for an insurance company for 23 years. And
Wow.
I did my work with them because I was a senior correspondent based on my education at Berkeley. That was what I did. And in fact, some of the letters that I created and the brochures that I created for them, they still use to this day. So again, then fast forward to moving to Southern California, where I met and married my husband. And we lived in Pasadena for a short time. And then we bought a house in Agora, and I had 2 children, 5 years apart. And I worked for a financial planner for several years. I stayed home with my son after he was born and had a daycare. And yet I kept in the writing, doing the writing. And so after that, I went back to work for a little while and then waited for a bit to go back to work. And I ended up working 8.5 years for a financial planner. And at that point, I decided to become a religious science practitioner. So I studied for 2 years to get my practitioner license, actually for 3 years to get my practitioner license, and then was, let's say, encouraged to pursue ministry. So in 1993.
What was the decade?
1993, actually. 1993, when I graduated from ministerial school. And I then was a staff minister in Simi Valley for a year. And then the Granada Hills Church of Religious Science came up as an open pulpit, and I was invited to candidate for that center. However, life getting in the way, my oldest sister passed away. I was working for a financial planner where we had this huge economic forum. And my friend Jason was fortunate enough to be hired as their minister. But he did not know that he was ill. And he was hired on January 14th. And on March 12th, he passed away unexpectedly. He'd only been there for 2 months. They called me back and said, would I come and take his place? They could not afford to go through the candidating process. And so I ended up there for 14.5 years. And then when Westlake Village came up in Thousand Oaks, California, I wanted to be back close to where my children lived and my granddaughter. So I came back here and was with them for 7.5 years. And then in 2016, I left the pulpit. And as my friend Dr. Sue Rubin says, I didn't retire, I rewired. I went back to my roots in editing and proofreading. And I have enjoyed that labor for the last almost 5 years now. Is it 5 years? 2016 and 521, yes. I got to add it in my head. So for the last 5 years, I've done editing and proofreading, not the least of which is your wonderful book. Don't just age, engage. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Maureen, it's a joy to work with you. And one of the things that most impresses me is the vitality with which you approach everything you do. You have a high level of vitality and interest, and it's almost like you're unburdened by any of the grief of the past or loss of the past. How are you doing that? Where do you get that vitality from?
Well, I'm not gonna lie. When I first left the pulpit, there was huge grief. You know, it's not just grief. There's a book out by, oh gosh, I can't remember the author's name, but the poet that writes in the book is Peter McWilliams, and it's called How to Survive the Loss of a Love. And in there, they talk about the loss of a job as the loss of a love, the loss of a child, the loss of a spouse, the loss of one's dignity and self-respect, the loss of many different kinds of losses that we grieve over. And I'm not going to lie, I did grieve over the loss of my pulpit in 2016. But I also know that had I stayed there, my lifespan would have been shortened significantly. That I really did need to leave the stress of that position. Because anyone who's been a pulpit minister and done church as a business and counseled and coached and do all the things that we do as ministers, we forget about radical self-care. For us, we seem to care for other people to the extent where our own care and feeding goes by the wayside. I have always maintained a spiritual program, though, Larry, and I think for me to set the day with my meditation and prayer work every single day is what keeps whatever that spark is alive in me, and that
Excellent.
I find things that are interesting. And if something doesn't work for me, my motto is find something more interesting to think about. That
Excellent.
and I give it a 48-hour rule. If I can't figure it out in 48 hours, then I need to tithe whatever that is to the universe, let it go, release it, and find something more interesting to think about. So that's really been my my sort of go-to as the years have progressed.
I like that, Maureen, the 48-hour rule.
Yeah.
It doesn't take hold within 48 hours, let it go and move on to something else. Huh?
Yes.
Well, that's excellent. Your vitality is just impressive, so impressive. And I'm thrilled to know that you're doing the very thing that you really like to do,
Yes.
which was how you started out life.
Yes.
Working with words, working with thoughts, working with minds. And you are an excellent editor, and it was a pleasure, certainly for me in my first book, work with you.
That seems awfully self-serving on my part, but honestly, it was great fun working with you too. I just love that you're so amenable to the changes that I wanted to make.
So when we make transitions, and you're very welcome for that, but thank you for your comment. When we make transitions, we end one thing and we take time to assess where we're at, what's meaningful for us in our life right now. And then we plan something new and then launch into that something new. Do you see yourself in any particular place in that mode of transition, in that transition process?
Speaking of words, I love the word segue because we never really close one door where another door doesn't open. There's a segue. And in 12 steps, they say no door closes where another one opens, but that can be challenging, and sometimes people get stuck in the hallway. And I think what you're offering in the book that you've written and the coaching that you're doing for people is you're offering an opportunity for people to get out of the hallway. Like my children's father has been an engineer his whole life. He really never had any hobbies except his 56 Austin Healey, which has been restored and is in pristine condition now. But you can only drive a car around so much. He doesn't have anything to occupy his time or his energy on a daily basis. And I think in your book, you coach people into creating an avocation of some kind, and I know for men, a lot of times what happens is they get stuck in doing, and they don't know how simply to be. Like a friend of mine was with GTE for many, many years. And when he left, he decided that he'd always wanted to fly planes. So he learned how to fly planes. And for 10 years now, he was a private pilot. And once the pandemic hit, that was off the table completely. So he also very musical. So guess what he's been doing since the pandemic started? He's been creating these incredible musical instruments, Larry. I was over at his house on Sunday night. I just think he would be a terrific interview for you sometime too. But these beautiful, beautiful, some stringed instruments, some that you would play with a mallet, kind of like a marimba. But he reinvented himself. Another friend of mine, and I might have shared this with you, he was a waiter at an extremely high-end Beverly Hills restaurant for years and made oodles of money working for this restaurant. But his avocation was making websites and working on the computer. And all of a sudden now he is a master website designer, and he's making more money than he ever did as a waiter. He'll never go back to being a waiter because now he's doing what he loves, and the money is just coming in droves for him. So the pandemic was good for some people in a way. Yeah.
Have you always done what you love? And is what you love primary for you now in your life?
Yes. There was only a 9-month period where I didn't do what I loved. And you're going to crack up. But we had this conversation the night before last, too. I worked for a very, very famous syndicated astrologer for 9 months. And I always jokingly say I worked for him for 20 minutes. But 9 months was all I could handle. It was the worst job I ever had in my whole life. And yet, the people that he was involved with were so fascinating because many of them were celebrities. And so I got these wonderful little insights into many of the celebrities, but absolutely the worst job. It's really not, it's like life or like marriage or like relationship. It's not what we can get from the job. It's what we bring to the job that creates the joy. It's not what we can get from the relationship, but what we bring to the relationship that creates the joy. And I think if we all took a step back and said, what am I bringing to this? Is it just because I feel the need to be an energy vampire and live off somebody else? No. That's not what relationship is about. What is the best of me that I bring to this job or what I'm doing? Mm-hmm. And I think when we get to that place, it's all perfect. It's all just perfect.
Wonderful. Maureen, I have identified the four human dimensions to every human experience. One is spiritual and one is physical, which you've addressed, relational and economical. In the relational dimension, what has come about for you? What's been new as you age, or what's been challenging and disappointing as you age in relationships?
The last 4 years have been an eye-opening experience in my relationships with people. As you know, that when you're a pulpit minister, as a minister, our job is to really treat everyone sort of equally and to resist the tendency to judgment or to really, not to see someone as bad or judgmental or resentful or angry or whatever, but to see their behavior that way. Because the person we're not inherently judgmental. We're not inherently angry. We're not inherently stupid, although you'd think some people might have a little stupid gene in them. I happen to know a few of those people, myself included, periodically. But the fact of the matter is when I began to step back and really look at people from their behavior, I don't condemn the person, I condemn the behavior. And so that's, I think, in a biblical sense, righteous judgment of what. But I also released several quote unquote friendships that no longer served me. And I found that this was, it's like trying to balance all the balls in the air, all the plates in the air, when you try to maintain friendships with too many people. You know, people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I'm enjoying the lifetime friendships right now. The reason or season people have kind of gone by the wayside. And I think that that's probably the most significant thing about elderhood for me is I don't have the time or the energy to try to balance all of that or integrate all of that. What I have had to do is have had to let go of relationships that are perhaps the needier people or the people who don't serve me.
And you figured out quite wisdom with quite degree of wisdom that you can't fix them.
No, that's not my job. It's not my job.
It's not our job.
No, not my job to fix anybody, because the implication there is that I'm looking at them like a wounded duck. And if I look at you as a wounded duck, you and I really can't be in a successful relationship together.
Yeah. Let me just say to our viewers, this is don't just age, engage. We're moving towards extraordinary elderhood, and I'm Dr. Larry Grimm. But I want to encourage you, if you have questions for Maureen, we're listening to Maureen talk about her success at aging well and into an extraordinary elderhood. And if you have questions, please send your questions to questions at, there it is, questions at ThinkTech.com, ThinkTechHawaii.com. And we'd love to put those to Maureen as well for you. So one of my big questions now, Maureen, in the process of transition, and I always say transition, we never know when we start a transition and when we really finish a transition. It can be, the lines are not clear. But in the process, there's the assessment. You've been doing some assessing of yourself.
Yeah.
And you have some goals now. What kind of goals are you wanting to launch into, or have you launched into in those 4 areas, maybe physical, relational, spiritual, economical? Can you share how you formulated those? What's been important for you?
Well, from a practical standpoint, I've been editing and proofreading other people's manuscripts, other people's work for now, seriously as a way to earn money for the last 5 years. But in the process, I started writing a novel, and it's almost finished. And so one of the goals that I have is to write my father's story. I have tapes, many tapes of having conversations with him late into the night. My dad passed away in 1989 from AIDS from a blood transfusion. It was before they filtered the blood. And so I would go to visit him up in Santa Rosa, and we would sit till the wee hours of the morning, and he would share with me his family history. So in the process of my move to where I'm living now, we found a box full of all those tapes. I thought they were lost forever. They'd been thrown out, but there they were. So I'm finishing up this one novel, and then I will start the next one. But probably my most challenging part is the physical part right now. The economical part is in good order. The relational part is in good order. I'm actually still I'm reclaiming a friendship with my children's father. So there's a nice relational connection there, although about as long as I can handle it is 4 hours. But I can still handle being with him where I couldn't for quite a few years. And the spiritual is a daily practice that I have. It's a given. I I do not forfeit that spiritual practice for anything or for anybody. And I don't take phone calls before 9 o'clock in the morning, which gives me time to take care of that part of it. And I think one of the best books in recent years is by Gary Keller. It's called The One Thing. And he says in there, and he would talk about all those 4 areas that you talk about, but he used different words. It's not a new concept, but you've put different words with it. And he said in the book, in the first few pages, he said, what is the one thing that you could do today if you did that one thing would change the trajectory of your whole life? One thing. For me, that one thing is meditation every day, because it sets something in motion. And I also set the coaching arena every day through my coaching instruction from the Academy for Coaching Excellence. I choose 5 qualities of being that I want to exhibit for the day. And I get a little bit wacko. I look down and I usually write them on the inside of my hand, but I knew I was going to be with you today, which might have been distracting if you saw the marks on my hand. But I set the coaching arena with 5 qualities of being that I want to experience in that particular day. So those things.
Not qualities of doing, but qualities of being.
Yes.
And it's out of that being that we really do something that's meaningful.
Yes, it is.
Okay, Maureen, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time now. And you've been watching Just Don't Age, Engage on ThinkTech Hawaii. Today we've been discussing one more extraordinary elderhood with my guest, Maureen Hoyt. Thanks for participating, Maureen, and thanks to our viewers for tuning in. I'm Dr. Larry Grimm, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another edition of Don't Just Age, Engage. Aloha.
Aloha.